Hey everybody, it's Jason Blah here, and today I want to talk to you guys about the only 3 exercises you will ever need for your back. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And you know, I get asked this off and on. Of course, when I say this, people say, no one asks you that. Yeah, they actually do all the time, both when I've been at gyms and online, because it's obvious once people kind of see me around at different times that obviously my back is usually my best developed body part. Even though I'm not a bodybuilder, it's not my gig. I know a lot about back training and back development. And quite frankly, I think most people out there have way too much variation for their back. And honestly, your back is really one of the easiest muscle groups to develop. And I don't mean easy in terms of work, because it's usually pretty hard exercises that do the best job. But easy in terms of not needing to put a lot of thought into it. In other words, you don't need any sort of complex programming. In fact, I'd say you can actually build a decent sized back without even bothering to do back work, as we think of as traditional back work, meaning your actual upper body pulling stuff, which really works well, and I've always done a lot of it, but I don't think it's necessary. In other words, Olympic lifters and other people without rows or pull-ups that oftentimes build big backs. There are people who just are good at deadlifting and overhead pressing and stuff who still can develop pretty big backs just off of that. But what people need to remember is that a lot of your big compound movements contribute to your back development. And when I say back, I don't mean lats, right? I don't mean just lats, because that's what people think of. Everything from the top of your traps to the bottom of your spinal erectors all the way down to your glutes, right? Your back ends at your glutes, ends at your pelvis, and it stops at the top of your traps. That's your back, that whole thing. The whole thing, guys. And so when I say back development, I do mean you really only need 3 exercises for the rest of your life to maximize that. Now, I'm not saying you're going to go win the Mr. Olympia with just these 3, but if you just want to have the biggest back out of any guy you know at the gym who's even close to your overall size, you only need these 3. And again, we see a lot of nonsense. You know, we see people trying to come up with new ways to do rows as if the old ways don't work. It's just people trying to give you trendy stuff or all these different new attachments. I saw something come through on a bodybuilder I know of on his Facebook, and he's trying to pimp like $1,000 set of different handles that you grip. It's like a big 8-pack of 8 different handles for lat pull downs. Talking about, oh, it works the back better. The back is easy to work. It's easy to work. So what are those 3 exercises? The only 3 exercises you ever need are a weighted pull-up, the barbell row, and some form of conventional or conventional deadlift variation. So let's kind of discuss those a little bit. Barbell row I want to talk about first, and the reason for that, that's what I've always built my base on. I have built my deadlift and chin-up strength and everything actually off of rows for the most part. And people forget that. They're always like, they think of when I have done really heavy deadlifts off and on. I actually didn't deadlift a lot to get there. I've very rarely done really high volume deadlifting. Now, I have done it for short periods of time, but I have found, because I've always liked to do a lot of squatting, I can't always do as much heavy deadlifting as I'd like. So deadlift for me has usually been technique work. Like even right now, you guys see me just pulling light singles or triples with double overhand. But then when I've walked in, you guys have seen me hit a really heavy deadlift, come in and do it one time in the last year, while using all this other stuff just to build up the strength, or to maintain it at least. So rows have always been my staple for that, and I did tons and tons and tons of pin lay rows. And any row off the floor is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about rows where you're standing up and letting it hang. I'm talking about rowing off the floor. It will build most of your back. In fact, we could argue that pull-ups might be better for the lats. We could argue a lot of things about the deadlifts, but when it comes to certain areas of the back, rows off the floor, especially because you're starting at that low angle, will not only build good lats, it tends to build slightly better rear delts. It builds better traps than these other exercises. In fact, rowing is one of the best trap exercises you can do, hands down. And again, I mean heavy rows off the floor. Particularly for your middle traps. It is probably the best exercise for your middle traps in existence. One of the best. But the same thing, I've done tons and tons of rows to build my back, and you guys notice I went over to weighted chin-ups. Wasn't doing chin-ups that long. I very quickly took my weighted chin-ups up to where I could do 100 pounds from a dead hang while weighing, what, 240-ish? So you're talking about like a 340-pound dead hang chin up. I didn't build my chin ups by doing a lot of chin ups. I did some leading into that, but I built it off of rows, just lots and lots of rowing. Because I've done up to 20 to 30 sets of rows a week. At one time I did that on camera. If you guys remember, I was doing 10 sets of 3 on pin lay rows 3 days a week for a while at one time. That alone can build your back up. I mean, honestly, you could probably get away with just really high volume, heavy rowing off the floor will probably build your whole back by itself, but the others that have their uses also. Pull-ups, probably the best lat exercise, right? And in addition to the fact that it builds everything else. I mean, pull-ups, again, particularly from a dead hang, they work the biceps tremendously well. They work the long head of the triceps. They work the upper chest. They work your abs. They work all these muscles, even though they're primarily, we think of them as a lat exercise. Hell, they even help train your grip. If you're doing them from a dead hang, you have more tension time holding onto the bar with the same amount of weight. So they can even help build grip in forearms. Again, radial brachialis up here. But yeah, tremendous lat builder. In addition to just being an all-around awesome upper body builder, they're a tremendous lat builder. Tremendous lat builder. Probably the best you will find. Not that that matters, because even something that's close to being a best for a muscle will put just as much muscle on you as the best exercise. So again, that's kind of an arguable point. But yeah, weighted pull-ups. Now, deadlift. Why does the deadlift come in? Because it's a complete back development. And again, I notice I'm saying conventional, or I say deadlift. I'm not talking about sumo. The sumo deadlift actually works your back a little bit less, right? It's a little more lower body dominant, and it uses a little less back. So the sumo is not what I'm talking about here. So we could also argue that a snatch grip deadlift or a deficit deadlift might do this even better depending on how you're built, but we're still kind of getting into the idea of a conventional stance. You're just adding additional range of motion, and that's what they do. People ask me on that sometimes, that's come up with the snatch grip. Well, doesn't the snatch grip work the muscles differently? No, because you're not snatching the weight up. You're not even doing a high pull, right? So that's what people are thinking of with the extra shoulder development. It's not what you're doing. It's still just a deadlift, right? So the snatch grip deadlift just creates a deficit without having to stack plates up. So you have to use a lighter weight, but you pull it through a longer range of motion. So it's essentially, really, it's just a deficit deadlift, and you're just using your grip to adjust the size of the deficit. And that's all it really is. So that's what's up with the snatch grip deadlift. But yeah, the deadlift, a complete top to bottom back developer. You know, it works the upper traps, works the erectors tremendously well, right? Premier exercise for the spinal erectors. Lower back, again, a lot of middle back thoracic erectors, and it does work the lats to a large extent. There's actual data on that, surprisingly enough, even though it's not a full range of motion exercise for the lats. When you put EMG's electrodes onto lats and have people do heavy deadlifts, they light up. They light up a lot. They are technically getting like a primary mover stimulus in it. So when you really look at just top to bottom back development, those 3 exercises, or very close variations of them, are really all that you ever need for maximum back development. Everything else is fluff and pump at that point. And I'm not saying you couldn't do some other stuff if you really wanted, but at a certain point I would argue why? You could also just spend that time recovering and then come back and hit these big lifts again harder sooner, just by skipping the fluff and pump. Again, unless you're blasting a couple grams of gear, in which case I understand that extra metabolic fatigue might go a long way. But for guys who aren't blasting high doses of anabolics, I don't really know that I would recommend anything else. You know, and a few people will say things like, well, you know, I'm not strong enough to do pull-ups yet, or have a client who's not. Well, hook a band up to the pull-up bar, put your knee through it, problem solved. You don't even need an assist machine, just a band. And then it's going to carry right over. As soon as they get strong enough to do enough, you pull the band off or go to a lighter band, or pull the band off. Now they can do pull-ups. Done. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.